In today's professional development spotlight, we're going to think about how to help children navigate from the science classroom to the RE classroom. And in case you're wondering, we're also going to think about why we might want to help children navigate from the science classroom to the RE classroom. You'll need to have the survey open as we do this. So you'll know you've got the right survey if the heading says Navigating the Classrooms. Okay, so here's a game. You can play this game whether you're a science teacher or an RE teacher or indeed a teacher of any subject. I want you to come with me into the chemistry lab. Okay, so we're in the chemistry lab right now. Look around you. What's on the walls? There's a poster over there. What's the poster? Just type it into the survey. What's the poster in the chemistry lab? Okay, so now think of some more things to tell me about the chemistry lab. Can you smell the benches? What do they smell like? Is there anything, any shelves? If there are shelves in the chemistry lab, what's on the shelves? We open a cupboard. What do we find inside a cupboard in the chemistry lab? Okay, so we're going to walk out of the chemistry lab now, and we're going to head to the RE classroom. And the first thing you've probably noticed is they're usually quite far apart. So we've probably got to go out of the classroom and then out of the science block. Maybe then we go across the playground or maybe even across the road and down the road a little bit and then into another gate and back into main school. And now we're going to go in through a door and we're going to go up some stairs and along a bit of a corridor. And here we are, we've got to the RE classroom. Okay, so once again, what's in the RE classroom? What's on the walls? If you've got a bit stuck after paint, then what's on the desks? There's a textbook on the desks. What's on the cover of the textbook? What's the picture you can see? Tell me a few more things about the RE classroom. Tap some ideas into the survey. All right, so just check your answers now. So you should now have some words to describe the science classroom and some words to describe the RE classroom. And then I'd like you to click Next on the survey. All right, so we've thought about what those two different classrooms look like. Now I want to think about what do you do in each of those classrooms? Okay, so now let's imagine you're about maybe 12 years old. What do you do in the science classroom? What kinds of things do you do in the science classroom? All right, so hopefully you're typing some things into the survey now for what you do in the science classroom. And as soon as you're ready, move on to what do you do in the RE classroom? Okie doke, so we've got a few ideas, I hope, now of what we do in the science classroom and what we do in the RE classroom. Once again, click Next on the survey. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a sort of a bit of a taxing question now. In which classroom are you more likely to hear some facts? In which classroom is the teacher more likely to give you some facts? And in which classroom is the teacher more likely to want to know your opinion? Which classroom do you associate with opinions? So just pop your answer into the survey. Remember, you're about 12 years old now as you do this one. So which teacher is more likely to want to tell you facts and which teacher is more likely to ask you for your opinions? Now the next one, you might think that I'm asking you here for an obvious answer, but you give the answer that you'd like to do. So if you're 12 years old, what would you prefer to have? Would you prefer to have facts or would you prefer to have opinions? What would you like? And as I say, it may sound like a really leading question, but go ahead and give the answer that you want to give. Do you want facts or do you want opinions? Brilliant. Okay, so now we're going to deconstruct these experiences a little bit and think about what research tells us and how children are interpreting their experiences in their classrooms. So we've done quite a lot of work interviewing and surveying children, and the first thing they can tell us about the science classroom and the RE classroom and the science teacher and the RE teacher is that the science teacher is going to want to tell them facts, and the RE teacher is going to want to hear their opinions. Most children like to be asked their opinions, so they tend to say they find that more interesting. But then again, they also think that they're going to get on better with facts, and facts are going to help them to get on in life and tell them what to do. So why is it that the first thing that children say about these two classrooms is that they've got facts in the science classroom and they've got opinions in the RE classroom? And are we okay with that? Is that an adequate way for the children to think about those two classrooms? It might also say that they do a lot of experiments in their science classrooms. And in their RE classrooms, they talk more. Maybe they hear stories or talk about stories. Once again, is that okay? Is that enough? Are there some better ideas that we might want to help the children to have as they navigate their way between these two classrooms? So I'm going to give you now a framework to think about, the epistemic insight framework, to help us to think about what we might want children to suppose and understand about their two classrooms. So we're going to go back into the science classroom again, and now we're going to do an experiment with some magnets. So I want you to imagine that we've got in front of us now two magnets, and I've got the north pole of one of the magnets and I've got the south pole of the other magnet. Maybe they're flat on the table. Do you remember from when you were at school, or maybe even more recently, what's going to happen? I've got the north pole and the south pole. So they're going to, that's right, they're going to attract, aren't they? Different poles attract each other, so they're going to slide across the table with a bit of luck. It's a bit slippery, and they're going to attract each other. Let's think a bit more about this experiment. So I've only got one set of magnets for the whole class, so I've got everybody gathered around and we're all doing it together. So I might be using the language of the science classroom. So I'll be asking them, what do they observe? What do they observe? Do they all observe the same thing? Have we all observed the same thing? All right, now we're going to make a prediction now. I want you to predict what will happen if I turn both magnets to face the other way. So now, instead of having the north pole of this magnet and the south pole of that magnet, I'm now going to have the south pole of that magnet and the north pole of that magnet. What do you predict will happen now? And if you want to test your prediction, if you want to see if you're correct or not, what will you do? That's it, you'll try the experiment, won't you? You'll turn them around and you'll see what happens. Now we might want to repeat it just to be sure, so we expect it to be repeatable. So let's think about some of this language that we're developing now in the science classroom. So we've done some observations. We've noticed that all of us can observe the same thing. We hope that we will all see the same thing. Not only that, if we do this experiment again in Australia, about 12 hours later, we will observe the same thing in Australia as well. So science is helping us to look at these quite generalized things that we can say about the natural world. And the natural world we anticipate in science, and indeed we discover through our science, behaves pretty consistently. And that's why we will get the same answers to the same investigations time after time, with a bit of luck, both in England, in Australia, in America, the world over. And that's why children are going to find that science seems to give them answers and facts and certainty and consensus. Not so much because science has some magic up its sleeves, but actually because of the types of questions we're asking in science. So we're very fussy in science. Not all questions will do. We want those sorts of questions about the natural world that we can address using observations, where we can expect within a reasonable amount of time that our observations will help us to draw a conclusion, that we can make predictions and test those predictions. Okay, we're going to go into the RE classroom again, and I'm going to cheat a little bit, because instead of taking a typical question that we might explore in the RE classroom, I'm going to choose a question a bit strategically. I'm going to avoid those sort of particularly contentious topics like evolution and creation and the Big Bang. where it starts to get a little bit more complicated, and even miracles, another good one for getting a little bit complicated a bit quickly. I'm just going to I'm going to chill a bit, and I'm going to ask a question that I could actually ask in a different classroom, but I'm going to make it an RE classroom. I'm going to be thinking about well-being. I'm going to paint a bit of a picture for you. So it's the pandemic, and it's a question about my grandmother that I want us to think about. And my grandmother has been shielding, and we want to keep her safe. But at the same time, we're really worried about her because we can't let her go out. It wouldn't be safe for her to go out, but she's getting very lonely. So what are we going to do? Are we going to allow or encourage or support Granny in going out, in maybe talking to the neighbour over the fence? Or are we going to persuade Granny, maybe through more Zoom calls, to stay inside and stay safe and shield? What's your opinion? What do you think? Well, it's a really different type of question, isn't it, to the one that we were addressing over there in the science lab? But it's not particularly likely that our children will have noticed how very different those two questions are. As I've already said, what they tend to notice is it's facts in the science classroom and opinions in the RE classroom. What we're noticing now, that the types of questions we're exploring in those two classrooms is really different. That's a bit lost on children. That's not something that they say. And that's what we want to encourage them to think about now as we help them to become more epistemically insightful. What are the preferred questions in each of those classrooms? And we talk about them as the preferred questions. It's not a hard and fast rule. We could ask a slightly different question in a science classroom. Of course we could. But science as a discipline has preferred questions. And religion and the wider humanities, the sorts of disciplines that we have in the RE classroom, they have different preferred questions. Okay, so we've thought about Granny, and let's analyse a little bit more why it is that we've got all of those different answers and how to make sense of that. So one thing we notice is that when we were in the science classroom, magnets are pretty much magnets, aren't they? North poles, south poles are all pretty much of a muchness. Grannies, vastly different. My granny, probably very different to your granny. Every child in that classroom has their own unique grandparents. That is a huge number of grandparents across the world, all of them slightly different. Unique grandparents, very different to thinking about, let's say, electrons and particles and the sorts of things that we talk about in science, where, as I say, much of a muchness. So, of course, we're going to have a huge variety of answers, not only because we'll have different ideas about how to support Granny, but also because our experiences of grannies is going to be different. Just before we finish, there's one more thing I want you to notice about the relationship between these two classrooms. Let's stay with Granny again. Science is going to inform our thinking about what to say in this situation. Science isn't going to give us an answer. It isn't going to tell us what the right answer is for how to best take care of Granny and how to help her to get through the pandemic. But science is going to inform our answer. We're better off with science than just leaving science in the science classroom. We're better off bringing some of that scientific thinking into the RE classroom and letting it inform our thinking. And this is another phrase that we have when we're helping children to become epistemically insightful. Science informs our thinking about the big questions that we explore in the RE classroom. So in this case, of course, how is science going to inform my thinking about what to say to Granny? Well, I'm going to think about some of the ways that Granny could stay at least reasonably safe if she goes out. So I could remind Granny that if she has a conversation over the fence, not to get too close to the person on the other side, and that she's better off having that conversation outside and over the fence, and not encouraging somebody to come into her home with her to have that conversation. I might think about how Granny could go out for a walk and meet somebody in the park, but again, not go and spend time with someone in the coffee shop. So science is going to inform my thinking. It's going to mean that some of my ideas are better than some of the others, but it's not going to get me all the way. It's not going to give me the right answer. All right, we're there. Now, if you just go back to the survey, there are a few last questions for you to fill in, and thank you very much.